economic system that's warped out of shape, which means that the 1% benefit, that it's designed to benefit the 1% rather than most people in the 99%, which is why you could get the number of billionaires that have the same wealth as half the rest of the world on one golf buggy.
The world's wealth is growing at an increasingly faster pace, and if your bank account isn't showing it, then you're not part of the 1%. A Credit Suisse report says the uber-rich now own half of the world's assets, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the United States. Americans took over $16 trillion created in the past year, and a disproportionate amount of that cash was grabbed by the country's millionaires. It's not a partisan problem. The middle class has diminished considerably under the Bush, Obama, and now Trump administrations. With more on this globally, let's talk to the former lead economist at the World Bank, Branko Milanovic. He's the author of a new book out called Global Inequality, a New Approach for the Age of Globalization. Good to have you on the program, Branko. Do you find that more and more people are coming around to the fact that it's not so much poverty that's the real menace to society, whether nationally or globally, but it's more inequality and relative poverty that's the big problem?
Well, that's true. Obviously poverty is a bigger issue in terms of, general welfare and the need for the world to eliminate extreme poverty. But the danger of inequality is a more insidious one. The danger is social stability. So high inequality really threatens social stability in many countries, and poverty is indeed a huge humanitarian issue.
So there's terrorism, there's fascism, there's organized crime, there's sort of disorganized crime, you name it. Globally, in this globalized world, which direction are we moving in? Are we becoming less equal? Is there more inequality which is leading to more and more problems?
First let me just say about inequality, it is, it's a diffuse thing. The ones that you mentioned before, like terrorism and other things, they are concrete in the sense that you can more or less define them reasonably well. When it comes to inequality, it comes in many shapes and forms. There is inequality of income, inequality of wealth, inequality of opportunity, gender inequality, racial, so there are many of them. But then to go to the second part of the question, we really have two different trends there that people sometimes have a hard time sort of visualizing or understanding. In most of the countries in the world, and that's what people experience, inequality has gone up, and they really feel it, almost daily. On the other hand, because Asia has been so successful in reducing, poverty and increasing incomes, global inequality has declined. In other words, China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia have now become part of the global middle class, and that drove inequality down.
Is there any amount of inequality that can be justified for the greater good? I know it's a terribly cynical question, but can we look at it and say, okay, in order for a system to have growth and abundance, generally, a certain amount of people need to suffer a little?
Well, of course, some level of inequality is even desirable. Let me just put it in a very sort of a common sense way. When we talk about inequality, we are not talking about a binary thing, like, there is zero inequality, everybody has the entire, equal incomes, or one, like a high number, like inequality, like one person has the entire income. We are always talking about sort of a number in between, and then pushing inequality down towards really very low, unsustainable level is not good either, because then you essentially lack incentive to work, invest, be productive, and so forth. Communist countries in the past are a little bit of an example of what is bad when inequality is very low. But on the other hand, we are now, in most part of the world, we are in a position that inequality is way too high, and that's not good for social stability, and it's not even good for the economy.
Are we still stuck with too much kind of economic ideology? Because there are those that would argue, yes, it's bad that there's a lot of inequality. Yes, it's diffuse and it varies from region to region. But this global market-centered approach of capitalism is the best thing we've got. And hey, we've tried communism, we've tried socialism, it's collapsed economies the world over. That sucks. We have the best way forward, so we have to just kind of press on with it. What are the solutions then, if not socialism and communism? Is there a third way?
No, there is actually, the solution is continuation of obviously capitalism and globalization, which with significantly greater redistribution within countries and equalization of opportunities, because that's absolutely crucial. You know, even people who are very much on the right don't dispute the fact that unequal opportunities are not only bad for individuals who suffer from that, but they're also bad for the country and for the growth. Actually, if you have lots of people, I suppose 1/5 of your population not having the opportunity to go to school or not having the opportunity to continue higher education and so on, that cannot possibly be good for the economy. You don't use the talents of those people.
The big question in many countries around the world right now, immigration. Is it good for the economy? Does it diminish and narrow that inequality gap, or does it widen it?
You know, I'm glad that you asked that question because, you know, when we come to immigration, it's a little bit like inequality. You know, the two extreme solutions like zero inequality or really incredibly high inequality are not good, as I was just saying before. Likewise with immigration, like zero immigration is really not a good solution because migrants really would like to increase their incomes, world income would thereby go up, and countries need migrants. Then on the other hand, full migration, where you would actually theoretically open all the borders, is unsustainable politically. So for migration too, we have to find a middle solution where you would have inflows from poorer countries into richer countries, which would also help richer countries, but you would have to have it in a controlled way. So, you know, we basically have studies that show that immigrants not only are bettering themselves, but very often they have complementary domestic workers who are also benefiting from that.
And as somebody who worked within the system, within these sort of transnational organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, are they on the right track? Do they recognize the right trends? And do they have, I guess, for the cynics out there who would be watching here and see them as sort of bloodsuckers, do they have the right intentions when it comes to ending poverty or reducing inequality?
You know, I left the World Bank 5 years ago. I'm now with the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, so I can perhaps more freely speak of what I think of both the IMF and the World Bank. I think that basically both institutions have readjusted themselves in the wake of the financial crisis. That's very obvious for the IMF, that has actually spearheaded in many respects new and very original and good studies about inequality. Now, the issue is whether that change of heart, which happens at the research department, both in the IMF and the World Bank, would actually percolate down to their policies. And I think that's a big issue. And we see some good signs, but certainly there's still very kind of old-fashioned approaches that date back to the Washington Consensus, which generally has been discredited. So I think these two institutions are in the process of change.
You've been a fascinating guest to speak to. Branko Milanovic, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.